Welcome everybody to a very special Indie Dev Showcase. This is number 100 of this series here on the channel. That is a whole lot of games that we've covered, and we have barely scratched the surface. So for this episode, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. I'm going to look back at each one of the many videos here, and there's the issue is that I didn't really start organizing them a little bit more seriously till around, I think it was like episode 30 or so. But I'm going to be looking through and going back and talking about some of my favorite games from the various ones we've done. And as always, if you would like me to tickle your game for a future stream and video, please reach out here, Twitter, email, whatever. And again, if you want to catch these streams live, they are held Wednesday nights, and the stream archives are sent to our secondary channel. But with that, it is time to, I guess, go down memory lane. We got quite a bit to go through here. So the first one, I guess I want to give a shout out to is Alwa's Legacy. This was in the very first part that was kind of archived here back when I was trying to do things a little bit more differently. And I enjoyed Alwa's Legacy, a really solid modern retro platformer, and one that I think definitely deserves some credit, or deserves a little bit more praise in terms of its design. Very well executed, and it does a great job of having those kinds of advanced tech that makes you want to try and do better and get around some of the game's obstacles or sequence break. One of the main goals of these indie showcases is to get the word out about a variety of indie games that you may not have played or even heard of from other streamers and other respective channels and sites. And Lumote was one of those games that I definitely feel deserves a lot more credit and praise than I think it got. This was a game that we interviewed the developers with as well, and this is a puzzle platformer with, I think, really great aesthetics. I love the fact that you can kind of see the entire world around you as you're going through and trying to solve its puzzles. It is on, I would say, on the trickier side with the emphasis on platforming as well as puzzle solving. But again, there are a lot of games out there that many people will miss and may never ever hear about. And I always hate when that happens, and why a lot of the games in this video specifically are going to be some of my favorites that kind of got passed up, I think, from a lot of people. Speaking of getting passed up, the next game that I want to talk about is BoyandBox. This was a game that we actually interviewed the developer. I think he was on like the newer side when we spoke with him. And it's another one of those games that it doesn't really look like, I think, a lot on first look, but it is a very solid, very challenging platformer, and that's always been, again, one of the big aspects of indie development, is being able to do things differently or try things in a unique way that we wouldn't see otherwise from indie developers, or just from anyone in general. And I can bet you that most of you watching this have probably never even heard of this game, let alone seen any footage of it. And again, why I feel these showcases are so important to get the word out about these indie games. Is BoyandBox the best platformer out there? No. It is definitely on the challenging side, and it is one of those games that I think it is so specific in terms of its mechanics that it may stop people from enjoying it. But again, part of the joy of playing these indie games is being able to experience titles and design loops that we wouldn't see otherwise. Another trend that I saw since we started doing these indie dev showcases has been the growing indie dev scenes from around the world. And one area in particular, Brazil, has seen a lot of creative games and developers kind of rise up in that space. And one of the first games we covered in a showcase here was Racket, a kind of shmup meets pong concept that does a really great job of elevating the kind of pong-based gameplay into its own unique aspect. And again, it's one of those things you would never see, I think, a major studio try and tackle. And it's just a really great concept and well-executed take that again, with a lot of the games I'm mentioning in this video, definitely deserves to be played by more people, especially with the fact that this one is co-op for added shenanigans along those lines. And with the many games on our video tonight, another game that really I think got the short end of the stick in terms of press and coverage is Intergalactic Fishing, a game that combines, well, open-ended gameplay with fishing, two things that I'm not a huge fan of normally, but this game does it in a way that definitely scratches that kind of just one more play itch, as well as just being very well executed in terms of its progression models. That you are just going out into the universe to procedurally generated ponds, lakes, and rivers and fishing. You're creating your own lures. There's a story if you want to follow it. If not, just go around, study fish, fish them up, and just keep doing it like that. It is one of those games that you can either play it for a few minutes or a few hours at a time. And again, with these games that we're talking about in this video, that it's just a great executed take on a concept that is then just expanded really as far as I think these systems and loops would allow. And definitely a solid recommendation for anyone looking for a great kind of short form gameplay loop that keeps you coming back again and again and again. And speaking about that just one more turn kind of feel, we have What the Golf, a game that is all about the idea of golf without actually golfing at all throughout this game. And again, developers took what seems to be like a very basic concept or just a very basic theme and just went as far as they could. There is a super hot level in this game. There is platforming golf. There's portal golf. There's boss golf. There is every kind of golf you could imagine that doesn't involve actually hitting a ball with a club. Just hilarious game to play, and one that we went through all the way and just smile on my face the entire time through it. Besides being able to play a lot of games that definitely didn't get as much credit or praise as they should have, there's also this concept or this trend of me playing games or being exposing to designs that I wouldn't have, I think, generally picked up on my own for one reason or another. And certainly the Hex would fall into this category. A adventure-esque focus kind of, I guess, a deconstruction of video game tropes and designs from Daniel Mullins, who's probably now more recognized for his latest hit Inscription. But being able to play games like this and being exposed to more has definitely helped my own sense of analyzing game design. And again, being able to talk to more developers about different gameplay loops and systems. And this is one of those games that certainly just, it has a very hardcore niche following, much like his previous games, such as Pony Island. And it's a title that you really have to experience it on your own to really get the full gist of it. One of the big things that we did with this Indie Dev Showcase series was starting to cover the demos from NextFest and the various festivals that Steam puts out. And this has led to just an explosion of games and almost near inexhaustible backlog of titles for me to play. But also, again, being able to look at more games and definitely kind of get a feel for what is coming out, what games to be excited for. And PokeyPoke is, again, one of those really great concepts. Very simple to look at, but the feel of the game is just fantastic in terms of the physics of using your spear to propel around, the puzzle solving. And again, like with the games that we're talking about in this series, it's not something that I think a lot of general consumers would, look at a store page or a thumbnail and go, I need to play this game right now. And hence why I wanted to keep doing this series. Because you need people to, shout from the rooftops when there is something unique, different, or great. And this is certainly one of those examples of it. As we kept going through the many indie games and demos and such that were submitted to the channel, I definitely got to see games that would go on to either kind of compete with major names or do something different enough that would separate it from those titles. And Shapes.io is another one of those very unassuming games. It is essentially an even more squared down version of a factorial progression model. You are building assembly lines and production chains, and that's it. And your challenge is just keep building and building, completing tasks, unlocking more, and just watching all these shapes move around on conveyor belts. It is a game very much like Factorio that you either get it very quickly or you're just going to tune off from, and that is perfectly okay. For me, I think this is a really solid game, and it is, again, one of those titles that very unassuming, that really just kind of captured a lightning in the bottle for its fans. And I do wonder if even the developer was surprised by the reaction it got, and just the the great reception that it received. There's definitely this sense, I feel, when it comes to the games that I cover, that I sometimes have this sense that maybe I'm the only one who's really playing these games, or at least covering them. And Keen is unfortunately one of those examples. This is a game that I heard very little from anyone else around the time of its release, and I just wonder if I was the only streamer or YouTuber who actually covered this game, which is a shame because it's yet another very great execution on what is normally a basic gameplay loop. Here is the idea of sliding box puzzles turned into an almost turn-based combat puzzle game with hidden things to find, power-ups, and just a lot in terms of presentation. It's a great, again, example of a game taking a concept further than you would expect and doing something unique with it. But unfortunately, as we've seen, unique oftentimes does not translate into major sales. And this is definitely a game that if you have not heard of this game, this is literally your first time you're hearing of it, definitely give it a check, because I think it deserves that at least. Another advantage of doing these indie showcases, both in video form and stream form, has also been the ability to play and showcase off short form games. And there are quite a number of them that we've played, and because of their obviously short nature, it makes it hard to cover them in larger videos. And one of the games that we played that I enjoyed was Candy Raid the Factory. The developer submitted this. We've covered the store page, and they're also on the Game Wisdom Discord. And the showcases have also been a great way of finding more developers who are interested in talking about their designs, as well as just growing the Game Wisdom community. This is a puzzle game that involves you, trying to collect candy. It's on the shorter side, as I said, with the challenge being to collect all the various candy bits. And we went through the game, we offer advice as well as just general play testing and feedback on it. And that's how we've gotten a lot of the games, or a lot of the impact from these indie showcases, of being able to play demos or early builds, or in some cases, again, a full version of a short game, and being able to show this off to people that may not have even heard of it, or maybe even other channels would not even try and cover it due to their short form nature. For our next game that I want to kind of give a shout out to, that is Gloom. And it kind of fits in the theme of the last few games I've been talking about in this video. It is a kind of very short-ish kind of action roguelike. It is one of those titles that is very unassuming, both from its thumbnail and the store page, and it does a really great job of being like an encapsulation of action roguelike elements. Great use of story with kind of Lovecraftian and otherworldly themes to it. And again, it's one of those games where I know most people did not cover this game, and I'm sure a lot of people did not even look at this one no matter what. But it is one of the reasons why I do my best to try and cover as many indie games as I can, because you never know, really, what games are going to resonate with you, and which ones can kind of do more, exceed the expectations set by the store page, and so on. And really, this is one of those games that I play, I think, way more than what you may think, considering the length of it. And I hope that we do see more from the developer. I tried to send them a message about it, and they never got back in touch with me, unfortunately. And I hope things are doing well for them. One of the best things about doing the indie showcases and these streams and videos is, again, being able to look at games that definitely have potential in one way or another. And the next game, Final Upgrade, is one of those. It is in a similar vein as stuff like Ministry, Factorio, Dyson Sphere, but the game definitely is trying to shoot for the moon in terms of both its logistical aspect as well as the degree in which that you can manipulate and build out your various machines and processes. The problem that this game has really comes down to onboarding. It is not the best presented game in terms of its mechanics and systems, and that is an unfortunate aspect. And I think also why, just with a lot of the games on this list, that it's hard to get this a kind of game like this in front of YouTubers and streamers and say, here, play this and let me know what you think. And it's kind of why I like my open door policy on indie games. And this is one of those games that, again, it will not appeal to, I think, a lot of people, but to the ones that it resonates with, they are going to love it. Speaking of games that definitely, I think, deserve a more attention than that may not have gotten it just due to their presentation or what their gameplay was, the Professor Lupo series is a really fun and very challenging puzzle games. Both games, there's one that's set in space and one set in the ocean, and they both essentially have different puzzles built on maneuvering around these areas and trying to solve or get out while dealing with these different enemies. Now, the challenge of these titles is that it's all kind of movement based, or you're moving very slowly, so there's a sense it's not quite turn based, but it has similar feelings to that. And these puzzles are very challenging, especially if you're trying to go for the bonus conditions or unlocking everything. And I think the game has a great style to it, but unfortunately it doesn't have a lot of reviews at the moment. And I definitely want to give both games a shout out, just so that more people are aware of them. And those games, once again, they're going to be Professor Lupo and His Horrible Pets, and Professor Lupo Ocean. And now another game that we looked at that eventually went on to being one of my favorite games of 2021, but started as in the showcase, was Webbed. Webbed is a fantastic game. It is one of those titles that just from playing the demo, I just had a smile on my face the entire time. And it's very rare for a game to hit that point for me. It is essentially just 2D Spider-Man physics-driven swinging with laser eyes. And again, this is an example of a game that, as a demo for one of the festivals, it really knocked it out of the park in terms of presenting what the game was going to be and what you were going to get out of the main experience. And this is one of those games that did eventually go on to doing really well, I would say, in terms of reviews and positivity or critical reception for it. And again, it all started, at least for me, by finding it at one of the festivals and playing that demo. Not every indie game has to completely break the mold, and sometimes it just has to be a very well executed take. And while that unfortunately in a lot of cases may not quote unquote wow new people, just coming out with a very polished and well executed version of the game is certainly challenging enough. And the next game I want to give a shout out to is Dojoran. This is a very challenging 2D platformer where the main force or the main mechanic is trying to manipulate different jumps, setting up for walls, wall jumping, avoiding lots and lots of obstacles, and doing what you can in terms of getting everything in the levels. It's I would say maybe on the moderate side in terms of length, especially if you get stuck at a few levels. But again, it's a great game that knows what it wants to be. And while it doesn't really, I think, excite in terms of new mechanics or new rules, it's still, I think, a really great game that deserves a little bit more credit for it. Another title was Kunai. This is kind of like a Metroidvania 2D action game where you're grapple hooking around while shooting, stabbing, and doing all manner of things in a post-apocalyptic world. And this is a game that has a lot of charm to it, with some very challenging aspects, lots of things to find and explore. And it has kind of like a Game Boy or maybe like a GBA, maybe more like Game Boy Color kind of aesthetic to it. And I enjoyed playing this one, and it's another title that from the demo that we experienced, we really enjoyed this one. So with that, we're going to finally take that break, and when we come back, we're going to try and get through the rest of these games for the special 100th episode of the Indie Showcase. And if you're interested in my thoughts on design, then check out my latest offering of books. For entry-level students, we have 20 essential games to study, and then the Game Design Deep Dive series that takes an extensive look at different genres, with free-to-play coming in 2022. One of the major purposes for these indie dev showcases and how they've kind of like taken over from the Saturday Night Grab Bags that we used to do here on the channel has been the fact there's just so many indie games being released, and it's near impossible to keep track of them all. And sometimes really great ones slip through the cracks. And that is the case with Leap of Fate. This was a game that I actually got from one of the many bundles and additional things that I get to find more indie games to play here on the channel. I think I'm like 6-7 years old at the time of when I played it on stream before when it first came out. And this is, I think, a really solid game that just kind of went under a lot of radars. Really well executed action roguelike with different characters. And while I think that he kind of like 90s style may have rubbed some people the wrong way, it is again a great element or great aspects of procedural design in order to kind of keep the gameplay loop interesting. And it is another fantastic example of an action roguelike that works by making very careful use of what is randomly and procedurally generated on each run. Another case of a game that really resonated with me that I'm not sure how many people actually got to play was Quantum Protocol. This is a deck-building visual novel style game, and what it does really well out of a lot of the deck builders that we've played and had a chance to look at on the channel is that it creates a sheer amount of variety of plays thanks to its focus on each character having their own unique style of deck. And then these decks can be upgraded kind of like an RPG with more cards, rules, etc. And it's a very interesting dynamic that we don't normally see from games that either focus all on the roguelike aspect or just all on the story-driven, where you just have one fixed deck for each run or each play. And I think what hurts the game is that the pacing is definitely very off, very similar to that of Library of Ruina. But I really enjoy kind of the interplay of the rules and how you really have to kind of relearn each deck for each character, and then throw in the random rewards, boss fights, and just the overall challenges of each dungeon. While it's definitely not for everyone, especially with the deck building aspects built in, if you are a fan of deck builders and looking for one that's a little bit more, I think, focus in terms of unique rules and design, definitely check out Quantum Protocol. Our next example is another indie game that has a very specific audience and niche, but it is also one of those games that it knows what it wants to be. And the process creates that perfect game or that perfect gameplay loop for a specific audience. And Time Break Chronicles is one of those games. This is the JRPG for JRPG fans, with its own original engine. This is not RPG Maker, no matter what this footage tells you otherwise. And it is a game that it is about building as many interesting and crazy party combinations of different job classes as one could reasonably get. And the game's been expanded many times since we played this on stream. And this is, again, a game where you're either all in or the game's just not going to do it for you. But if you do fall on that list of being in, this is most definitely a game you want to play. Speaking of which, our next game is another one of those games that I really enjoyed, and I know it sadly did not do well, and that was Vision Soft Reset, a time loop based Metroidvania. We interviewed the developer about this one on stream, and they definitely understood not only what makes good movement tech, but also good Metroidvania design. And I think what unfortunately hurt this game is that the aesthetics are the weakest aspect of it, and that he had to kind of rush the ending of the title. But still, just like Time Break Chronicles, very razor or laser focus in terms of its market and its gameplay, and if it resonates with you, this is the game you definitely want to play. Our next game is a title that, again, could really only come from the independent space, and that is Morkredd. This is kind of like, I guess, a Super Monkey Ball or Katamari Damacy, but in co-op, with light being our principal mechanic. Your mission, with you alone or as a friend, is to maneuver a light ball through a dead world where shadows are evil, and you're going to have to constantly manipulate where the orb is going and where you are standing in terms of relation to it, to dodge shadows, solve puzzles, and do some very crazy stuff with these mechanics. Another game that from the outside may not look all that appealing, but if you have a friend to play it with, I definitely recommend that you go through it, especially for the final section, which completely breaks its own rules for some fun. Now, with a lot of these smaller indie games we've shown off, they really do emphasize just how far you can go in mechanics when you're not so much worried about art and aesthetics. And the Siralim series is certainly a case of that. Imagine if Pokemon meets Shin Megami Tensei with the breadth and depth of systems and additional things you can do of a Disgaea or a Nippon Ichi game. And that kind of approaches the Siralim series. The latest one, Siralim Ultimate, came out early access, I believe, late 2021. And again, this is a game that you are either all in for it or you are going to back away slowly. But the combination of party-based dynamics, creature cultivation and collection, and just the sheer amount of depth with its systems and mechanics definitely makes it a game that you should at least check out once to see if it works for you. Besides covering the many festivals and dev-submitted games for these indie showcases, we also look at specialty events such as the Haunted PlayStation 1 demo discs and stuff from Itch. And one of my favorites from the Haunted PlayStation 1 demo disc was Loveland, a kind of detective mystery horror experience. Another game where you could tell from the demo what they're going for or aiming for with the mechanics, and leaving you with a lot of questions that obviously you want to get answered when you play the finished game. And definitely these stand out, at least for me, although there were a lot of great ones from that PlayStation 1 demo disc, as a way of seeing what indie devs are doing with horror. Sometimes with playing these indie games, what you see at the very first version of it may not represent the current state, and this is especially true when you play early access games, and even titles that have been out for a while. And The Dungeon Beneath is one of those games. It's kind of one part idle RPG, party-based roguelite or roguelike experience, where you build parties out of different classes and units and set them all up on a board to figure out who to attack and best way of synergizing their aspects. The game has received multiple updates since its release with more content, multiple new game pluses, new characters, and it's again one of those games I think slipped through the cracks for a lot of people, and why I wanted to give it a shout out here. Because this was again one of those games a developer reached out to me to cover, and I was pleasantly surprised with playing it here on the stream and for our video. And speaking of another crazy game. Similar to Morkredd, we have Hoplegs, which is kind of like in the vein of Getting Over It, Pogo Stug, Jump King, but being a lot more deterministic in how you control it, with each button corresponding to a different leg as you push, jump, and slide around various levels. Co-op was certainly a weird experience, to say the least, and this is again a game that you're either going to love or hate, and I was really enjoying it from our play. Our next game is another surprise from the indie space, and one where the developer reached out to me, and that is Boy Beats World. A game that I originally thought I was going to do horrible in, considering it's a music or rhythmically based timing for its gameplay and combat. But the game makes more than enough concessions and approachability aspects to allow even somebody like me who is tone deaf when it comes to music to get through it all. And again, another game where I think the aesthetics and general presentation probably hurt it in the mainstream point of view, but it is one of those games that if you play it, I'm sure you're going to enjoy it, especially if you like rhythmic timing when it comes to your gameplay and general exploration. And for our next game, this comes very recently from Next Fest 2022, and that is Turbo Overkill. Of the many demos that we played during that entire week, this take on the quote-unquote boomer shooter, or maybe just like super ultra kill Doom Eternal style of push forward combat really worked for me. And as we went through the demo, it just kept getting better and better in terms of the mechanics it was presenting and the gunplay that we were unlocking with the different weapons and tech that was in it. And while it still has, I think, quite a way before it is released, similar to Webbed, this was a demo that got me really excited about playing the full game. For our next game, this is another example of where a developer got in touch with me, and I found another hidden gem among the independent space, and that is Prodigal. The kind of Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening slice of life, and a whole lot of other ways of describing this game. Really heartwarming story, and again, with a lot of the games mentioned in this video, very solid execution. And the game definitely deserves credit for having almost, I think, over a year's worth of additional content, features. We played the game on one of the hardest ways with the 4 Pillars challenge, but not, ironically, the hardest way of doing it. But yet again, another great example of a developer really wanting to make their own take on a specific genre, and they facilitated that with a game that stands out, and it is just one of the better examples of this kind of gameplay loop, with enough twists and turns for people looking for a little bit extra with it. And for our final game of the showcase, or for this 100th episode, this is one of the other demos that we saw from Next Fest 2022, and that is Ghostlore. Another game that is very unassuming from the outside in terms of the quality. This is a game that is an action RPG based on Southeast Asian folklore and mythology. And again, it's a title that if you look at the thumbnails or the capsule, it probably isn't going to wow you or, knock your socks off. But after playing the game for about 10 minutes, like if you are an ARPG fan, you can clearly tell that a lot of care has been put into this game, especially in terms of making the ARPG elements pop and being very well defined in terms of these mechanics. And it is, again, one of those games where I just really enjoyed the demo, and at the end of it, I was just ready to play the whole game. And definitely, again, another example, one that you really want to play or check out if you're a fan of that genre. So, with that said, thank you so much for watching this massive video. There's no way I'm fitting all the games on the thumbnail this time. But I would again like to give a shout out to all developers who have been submitting games and letting me check them out here. And I am always looking for more, so please get in touch and we'll see where things go after another 100 videos. Do all the liking, subscribing, and commenting, and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where some of the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.